This is the $100 billion Button, a series on the science of money and well-being. It is produced by Sycamore, an app to learn and practice well-being. Visit us at trysycamore.com. Welcome back. By this point in the series, you should be able to appreciate that when it comes to money and well-being, the relationship is far more nuanced than simply money means happiness. Our culture, however, remains enamored with money. And we talk about it in such extreme ways. When somebody comes across a large windfall of money, we say things like, they're set for life. When someone gets that big promotion, we say, they've made it. And when we say that someone is successful, the implication is, they've made a lot of money. This one is worth pausing on. Our implied definition of success is having made money. Not if the person in question worked on important problems. Not if they treated others around them with dignity and respect. Not if they're good community members and family members. And not if they've led a happy, healthy life. When we reflect on what success means, it's hopefully clear that we don't actually collectively believe that it's just about the money. We do care about all these other things, a lot in fact. Money is clearly not something that we should exclusively or unconditionally value in our society. And indeed, when you dig into it, money is not the only thing we pay attention to. There are many dimensions to life that we care about. To that end, the German sociologist Max Weber made the distinction between class, power, and status when it comes to social stratification in society. By Weber's definition, class refers to one's wealth. A Fortune 500 CEO has a high-class position. Meanwhile, power refers to one's ability to influence and achieve goals. A head of state has high power. And status refers to how one is perceived socially by others. A movie star has high status. Note that these three things often correlate. For instance, that movie star tends to have high status and high class, with a moderate amount of power depending who they are. But these three also often diverge. Take people who generally have lower amounts of wealth, yet high power and/or status. Someone who works in local government is a good example. They typically have modest pay, yet are typically well regarded and have power to influence their communities. Community leaders and school teachers are another. They have meaningful roles in our society despite rarely being among the wealthiest. Professors are similar. Some at the top are quite well paid, but the majority are not in the highest income brackets. Yet they have enormous power to influence our base of knowledge, and their status is similarly high. Now consider the opposite. People who have high amounts of wealth, yet questionable power and/or status. Take a criminal. If they're good at it, they can be fabulously wealthy. Yet by living on the fringes of society, they have low power and very low status. Or someone who works in a mid-level job in finance. Their pay might still be astronomically high, but they work at the whim of people above them on the hierarchy, translating to low power. Consider what changes after pressing the $100 billion button. Suddenly, you have just about maxed out class, but your power and status don't necessarily change. The cases can get even more extreme. Take someone who makes money by exploiting others, whether by forced labor, dangerous working conditions, or abusive treatment. They may have high class and high power, but when it comes to status, they should hopefully be perceived by others as a rather abhorrent individual. You can even consider someone who makes their money not by doing anything strictly illegal, but by being generally dishonest, manipulative, and self-advancing. This doesn't feel like someone we should revere in society. The point is that money is just one dimension of what we aspire to. Things that can come along with the money, or are lost in our pursuit of it, also matter deeply to us. Solely focusing on the dollar sign causes us to overlook these things we value just as much, if not more. There are few better examples of this than GDP, one of our primary measures of the economic health of a given country. GDP, which stands for Gross Domestic Product, measures the monetary value of all goods and services produced in a country over a given time period, at least in theory. The main problem with GDP is that something must be officially sold in the market to be included in this metric. What this means is that many things that we should value yet do not get sold, therefore do not make it in. Additionally, things that we should not value do make it in because they are sold. Let's consider a few examples. Domestic work. Activities done within the household, like cooking, cleaning, and raising children, are nowhere to be found in GDP, despite the fact that these are critical activities. In particular, our investments of time and love into child-rearing are some of the most valuable we make as a society. Yet if we instead decide to pay a nanny to help raise our kids, GDP suddenly increases. Healthcare. One of our overwhelming goals as a society is to ensure the health of its people. Yet the less healthy a population, the more it spends on medical care, and the more GDP rises. Environmental degradation. GDP tends to increase with environmental harm. The more trees we chop down and sell, the more oil we drill and burn, and the more water we pollute in our factories, the more GDP rises. And when we face the consequences of this behavior, such as an increase in natural disasters or a big oil spill, GDP increases even more since we have to spend money to clean things up. Given that GDP is such an important economic metric, we focus intently on its growth. Yet if all you care about are growing dollar signs, then GDP encourages all sorts of odd behaviors. If you cut the entire education budget and double the size of the military, GDP will go up, at least in the short term. And GDP is blind to issues of income inequality. An unequal society with a few hyper-rich individuals, with everyone else in crushing poverty, is preferable to a more egalitarian society in terms of GDP, so long as the unequal society has more total money. Yet while we live in such a market-driven world, it's crucial to remember that money is not everything. Many of the most important things have no obvious dollar sign. What is the value of a healthy life? What is the value of a clean, sustainable environment? What is the value of good parenting? What is the value of love and friendship? What is the value of a happy, fulfilled life full of meaning? These may well be the most important aims we have in our time on Earth, yet they are nearly impossible to value. I say nearly because there are some attempts. When it comes to our environment, there is a movement towards what is called natural capital accounting, by which the value of our natural resources is estimated in a variety of clever ways. This means that our forests have value, our fresh water, our land, even our biodiversity. The idea is that if these natural resources have a value, then using them or damaging them has a cost, and allows for a true cost-benefit analysis that we currently do not have. This is a nascent field, but an important one. When it comes to well-being, there have also been attempts. One of the most publicized comes from the small nation of Bhutan in South Asia. In 1998, the Prime Minister of Bhutan introduced an alternative measure of progress called Gross National Happiness, or GNH. Every 5 years, the government surveys a random selection of households on their well-being. And it's not just happiness and life satisfaction thereafter. Survey takers are asked 300 questions, covering everything from sleep habits to community involvement to family dynamics, to work hours, to spirituality, to exercise routines. GNH isn't a solution in and of itself. Measuring is not useful without corresponding action, but it suggests that we can reorient our societal goals at least partly away from just money. That said, sometimes money is deeply embedded in societal narratives. Nowhere is this more true than in the United States, where money is often viewed as a symbol of hard work. Having money suggests that you worked for it, that you applied yourself in your career and deserve to reap the rewards. In America more than any other country, this message is amplified by conceptions of the self-made man, the bootstrapping entrepreneur, the rags to riches success, the immigrant with a suitcase who takes full advantage of the land of opportunity. In the United States, your starting point is no limit to where you can end up. By this narrative, upward mobility is readily possible. It's just a matter of how hard you work. Is this the right way to think about things? At the heart of this question is what we should think and feel when we encounter someone who is rich and someone who is poor. And for better or worse, we do think and feel a lot. We feel envious, or superior, or insecure, or sympathetic, or judgmental, or awestruck. We compare ourselves and try to explain differences. We rationalize their position in ways that make sense to us. There are different narratives we can rely on for this. At one extreme, money represents merit. If you are rich, it's because you earned it. You had a superior work ethic. You applied yourself. You improved yourself. You went to school and learned what you needed to succeed. Or you dropped out and taught yourself all you needed to. In either event, you found an opportunity and made the most of it. And you did this over and over again, climbing ladders and doing more than those around you. The billionaire startup founder saw an opportunity in the market. They developed an idea. They raised money. They built a team. They took huge risks, making decision after decision correctly, and cashed in on it. What about if you are poor? In this universe, the explanation is a bit more judgmental. If you're poor, it's because you did not have a strong work ethic. You failed to apply or improve yourself. You went to school and squandered the opportunity. Or you dropped out of school and squandered the opportunity. You missed chances to influence those around you. Others outcompeted you for promotions and raises. That's the merit narrative. But in another narrative, money represents luck. At its extreme, this story goes something like this. We have no control over our birth. By complete chance, we are born into our specific family, in our specific birth year, in our specific hometown, in a specific country somewhere in the world. Not only that, but we are born with genes from parents that we did not choose. From that moment of birth, our life is suddenly set into motion. What happens from here is somewhat of a chain reaction, where all our life circumstances that follow are determined by all the genes, experiences, resources, people, environments, and education that we had in the past, all of which can be traced step by step back to that accident of birth. To reason through this, we are raised as babies by our random parents in our random environment with the random resources they have, all of which, again, trace back to our birth, and over which we have no control, since we are just babies. We grow from a baby into a child, at which point it seems like we're starting to forge our own path. We start to develop traits, we can reason, we make choices for ourselves, we show early aptitude for certain kinds of tasks. But while it seems like we're removed from that moment of birth, in fact, we can still trace everything back to that. Take something like our personality. This can still be attributed to some combination of our genes, our parents, and the environment we were raised in. And the sequence of events in the world and in our brains that shape that personality all form a chain that leads right back to the setting into which we're born. This same logic works all the way into adulthood. Even though you feel like you've made all your current circumstances today, they all follow from what your circumstances were yesterday. And those follow from the day before. And we continue to ladder back recursively until we hit your moment of birth. By this argument, that billionaire startup founder did see that opportunity in the market, but they were born in San Francisco, the hub of venture capital, and were surrounded by entrepreneurial energy their whole life. And their father ran a small business and encouraged them to pursue business and take chances. And some combination of genes, environment, and early childhood experiences that their parents gave them made them more risk-loving than the average person. Or maybe they weren't. Maybe they were born in rural Pakistan, and their parents moved to Wisconsin when they were a child, working and saving just enough to give them a shot at college. But even in this story, now the entrepreneurial energy comes from their parents' resourcefulness and risk-taking. Their aptitude for running a company comes from knowing how to spend money wisely and do things in scrappy ways. Their early childhood move to Wisconsin emboldened them to move to Silicon Valley and trust that they could adapt to a different setting. And that chance conversation with another Pakistani who agreed to be their first investor made all the difference. This doesn't mean that surprising things can't happen. People who grew up destitute can become multimillionaires, and people who had parents who never graduated high school can become prolific academics. Likewise, people who grew up rich can lose that money. Children of Olympic athletes can end up deeply unathletic. It just means that outcomes can be traced back largely, if not completely, to luck. And in this world of luck, you're playing a game with odds that you're randomly assigned at birth. Crucially, this applies to how much money you end up with, too. Consider this. If you are born in a country like Liberia, in Western Africa, the chance that you go on to become a billionaire is statistically zero. In fact, it has never happened. This would actually be true in all but 5 countries in Africa. Same goes for all but 8 countries in Latin America. This example may seem rather silly. Becoming a billionaire is not something anyone should reasonably expect. But it's actually quite significant. We can say with near certainty that being randomly born in a country means a given life outcome is impossible. This gets a bit trippy when you start to think about time. You happen to be alive today. But that's totally random, and you did nothing to merit being alive today versus 1,000 years ago, or 500 years in the future. And considering that 109 billion humans have lived on Earth in our species' history, it's actually unlikely that we should be alive at this very moment. On average, we would have been born 2,000 years ago. And people then had literally zero chance of becoming even a millionaire, let alone a billionaire, in terms of today's wealth. Is that because they didn't work hard? What our society values is also implicated in this. Today, one of the most lucrative jobs you can have is being a software engineer. If you can think abstractly and solve large problems while navigating small details, all while sitting and typing on a computer screen, yet without developing back pain, eye strain, or carpal tunnel syndrome, the labor market will reward you handsomely. But just 100 years ago, half of homes didn't even have electricity, let alone anything resembling a computer to program. You might end up doing some moderately similar job, but your prospects would be far less lucrative. And having an aptitude for computer programming 1,000 years ago would be next to useless. In all likelihood, you would want to be large, strong, and enjoy being outside doing hard labor. Ending up as either type of worker is equally random, but which kind you are is highly determinant of your earning potential in the random year you're born. Warren Buffett, the billionaire investor who has been a mainstay atop lists of the world's wealthiest people, summarized this perfectly. My wealth has come from a combination of living in America, some lucky genes, and compound interest. Both my children and I won what I call the ovarian lottery. For starters, the odds against my 1930 birth taking place in the United States were at least 30-1. My being male and white also removed huge obstacles that a majority of Americans then faced. My luck was accentuated by my living in a market system that sometimes produces distorted results. I've worked in an economy that rewards someone who saves the lives of others on a battlefield with a medal, rewards a great teacher with thank you notes from parents, but rewards those who can detect the mispricing of securities with sums reaching into the billions. In short, fate's distribution of long straws is wildly capricious. So we have 2 competing views of how someone gets to be rich, or poor. In the merit world, people earn and deserve their outcome. In the luck world, people's outcomes are random. Some people are firmly at either extreme. Others see the world as some combination of the 2. It's worth considering where exactly you fall on the spectrum. However, even if you believe strongly in the merit view, there are some circumstances where it pretty clearly breaks down. Consider someone who wins the lottery, or someone who inherits millions of dollars from their parents, or someone who was given some Bitcoin as a joke gift by their friend in 2011, back when it was $2. You could argue that these people did something. They bought a lottery ticket and chose some numbers. They held onto the Bitcoin instead of selling it. They managed to be a good enough child to remain in their parents' will. But these arguments are pretty weak. Does this person really merit their millions of dollars? And does the person who didn't get any of these really merit their lack of money? These kinds of outcomes feel a lot more like luck than merit. And the scenario we've been considering throughout this series, getting kidnapped and offered a $100 billion button, is unequivocally luck. It becomes more important to consider money and merit as we consider people on the highest end of the money spectrum. As we've touched on throughout this series, there are people out there who aggregate massive amounts of money. For the top 350 public companies in the United States, CEOs were on average paid $25 million annually in 2022, which is 344 times as much as their average employee. 344 times is a lot. No one can reasonably deny that. The question is whether that pay differential is deserved. If you subscribe more to the luck view, then this is probably a pretty suspect claim. If you fall more on the merit side, perhaps this isn't so concerning. For starters, it's clear that a CEO is not doing 344 times the work of the average employee. Even if they worked all 24 hours of the day, every day, that would only be 3 times the effort. Their work may have more scope and consequence, but the things they're doing have to conform to the laws of time just like the rest of us. That said, it's also clear that a CEO should earn a good amount more than an average employee. If they weren't, it wouldn't be a job very many people would sign up for. There is little incentive to add the monumental stress and responsibility of running an organization without having something to recognize it. You also want the compensation to be a sufficiently high reward that the most dedicated, prepared employees aim for those positions. However, is 344 times the right amount? One reason to be skeptical is that this gap in CEO-employee pay has been increasing since 1965, when they were paid 21 times more on average. Over this time period, have CEOs been doing more and more compared to their average employee? This would imply that CEOs do 16 times more than their average employee today than they did in 1965. Whatever the appropriate differential is, that fact itself feels harder to accept. The broader concept at play here is that of nonlinear returns. Put simply, this means that as you reach higher positions on the job ladder, the pay starts increasing by more and more. Some part of this is simply mathematical. A 10% raise for someone earning $50,000 is $5,000. A 10% raise for someone earning $500,000 is $50,000. However, part of this is how our compensation systems are set up. At the highest ends of the spectrum, employees not only receive sizable cash salaries, but also receive shares of the company as compensation and healthy bonuses, which can massively boost their pay. But your average CEO making $25 million a year isn't even the tip of the iceberg when it comes to nonlinear returns. The upper echelons of wealth in the world are truly unrecognizable. We have been contemplating $100 billion, not because it's some mythical number, but because there are people living right now who have this much money, and more, at their disposal. Their wealth, typically from some combination of entrepreneurship, finance, and inheritance, is so large that we struggle to even fathom it. For some sense of scale, let's compare $100 billion with some people we can more easily relate to. Over their lifetime, the average lawyer earns roughly $4 million, 25,000 times less than $100 billion. The average doctor earns $7 million over their career, still 14,000 times less. What about your average hedge fund manager? These are typically among the richest people in a given metro area, hauling in $84 million on average over their career. Yet even this hedge fund manager is still earning 1,200 times less. What about the highest tiers of celebrity? Consider Beyoncé. She has a net worth of $400 million. Sounds like we're getting close, right? Nope. She is still earning 250 times less. That's right. Beyoncé has a mere 0.4% of our $100 billion individual's wealth. The framing can get even more extreme. When you have $100 billion, you have more wealth than entire countries' economies produce annually. One person who has $100 billion has nearly twice as much wealth as the entire Democratic Republic of the Congo, with a population of 100 million people, produces in an entire year. Let's consider these ultra-rich individuals in aggregate. The 400 richest Americans own $4.5 trillion, more than the bottom 60% of Americans combined. Those 400 people could only fill 2/3 of a Boeing 747 airplane, yet have more combined wealth than 200 million Americans. Although all this begs the question of what could merit such extreme wealth, the goal of this series is not to condemn inequality. Rather, it's to consider how we should think about money relative to well-being, regardless of whether you belong to the merit or luck camp. As we've established, by the time you're talking about hundreds of millions of dollars, the marginal benefit of having more money to your well-being is effectively zero. And this holds true whether we're talking about experienced or evaluative well-being. So all that wealth is not able to do a whole lot for you. But what if we flip this situation and consider what that money could do for others? You might have saturated money's effects on your own well-being, but there are literally several billion people on Earth who are nowhere near that level. The marginal impact of another dollar for them is quite meaningful. Indeed, If we consider those 400 richest Americans, the scale of what impact they could have on others is remarkable. Take malaria. Malaria is one of the deadliest diseases on Earth, and depending on your estimate, it has killed more people than any other infectious disease in history. Moreover, about 2/3 of malaria deaths each year are attributed to children under 5. Malaria cuts the lives of 275,000 children short each year. Yet the estimated cost to permanently eradicate malaria amounts to 3% of the wealth these 400 Americans own. In fact, at an estimated cost of $100 billion, you could single-handedly do that after pressing the button. And the impact on the well-being of these people is impossible to overstate, since it is quite literally life-saving. Another example is clean water and sanitation. Nearly 850 million people have no access to clean water of any kind, and roughly the same number have no access to a toilet of any kind. Contaminated water causes a host of human diseases, including cholera, dysentery, and typhoid, which kill over 800,000 people every year. It is estimated that for $240 billion, you could provide clean water and waste disposal for everyone on Earth. This would be 7.5% of the wealth owned by the 400 richest Americans. To recap, if you did both, approximately 10% of the wealth of 400 people could save over 1 million lives each year in perpetuity. And that group would still have $4 trillion left over to either enjoy for themselves or spend on other global priorities. It's quite clear that spending their money this way would be a historically generous and heroic thing to do. Some would go farther, saying it is actually their moral responsibility to spend their excess wealth on those who are far less fortunate. The famous philosopher Peter Singer is perhaps the staunchest advocate for this. He argues, quite forcefully, that having the resources to save people who are dying and choosing not to do so is morally repugnant. He draws an analogy to walking past a child who is drowning in a small pond. The pond is shallow for you, a matter of wading out to grab them and save their life. But you are wearing your most expensive shoes, and you don't have time to take them off if you want to save the child. The decision becomes a question of sacrificing something of value and saving a human life. And in this scenario, almost everyone would agree that choosing to let the child drown would be an abhorrent thing to do. Yet Singer argues that this is what's happening every day of our lives. We just can't see the children and don't feel the same urgency. Every few minutes, there's a dying child somewhere in the world, whether due to malaria, contaminated water, or malnutrition. And the cost to save one of their lives is often trivial compared to our resources. Again, this is an extreme argument, although thought-provoking. To what extent it is fair or not is somewhat beside the point, because we're interested in well-being. And in that light, it's better to frame this as an opportunity rather than a responsibility. If you recall from last episode, the research on philanthropy suggests that spending money to help others provides a boost to well-being greater than spending on yourself. And given that you have more money than you can possibly spend on yourself, it really is an opportunity to make your money go farther. And that argument makes sense even if you just focus on your own well-being. For those you help, who are among the poorest people on Earth, that same dollar that does almost nothing for you has a huge marginal impact on their well-being, since it really is life-saving. Some of the richest 400 Americans have already started to allocate their money to helping others. Bill Gates and Warren Buffett, who each have a net worth of well over $100 billion, are prime examples. Gates, the founder of Microsoft, launched his charitable foundation in 2000. It currently has an endowment of $75 billion, spending their money in areas like water and hygiene, economic development, family planning, and immunization across 130 countries. In 2006, Buffett made a commitment to give away 99% of his wealth to philanthropy by the time of his death, and has since set up a charitable trust with $100 billion. It's almost as if he pressed a green button, too. In making that pledge, Buffett wrote, "The reaction of my family and me to our extraordinary good fortune is not guilt, but rather gratitude. Were we to use more than 1% of my wealth on ourselves, neither our happiness nor our well-being would be enhanced." In contrast, that remaining 99% can have a huge effect on the health and welfare of others. That reality sets an obvious course for me and my family. keep all we conceivably need, and distribute the rest to society for its needs. Gates and Buffett are people who view their resources as tools for well-being broadly. Both have a clear understanding of the diminishing returns of money to their own well-being and the power they have to benefit others. While they have exorbitant amounts of money to distribute, it suggests a lesson for far less wealthy people, too. With that, we'll wrap for today. In our next and final episode, we'll bring everything full circle and decide what to do about our green button. Stay tuned. Hi there, this is Henry, the founder of Sycamore. At Sycamore, we are out to help people better understand, manage, and practice well-being. If you've enjoyed this series so far, please consider sharing it with a friend, and visit us at trysycamore.com to learn more. Thanks again.